Paying for your kids' college can feel overwhelming. That's why College Av's price.
Avery Wilson, everyone. And right now, we can once again give a warm welcome to our Mayor of New York City.
New Yorkers. For 53 long years, we have watched and we have waited. We have watched from nosebleeds and through gritted teeth, on televisions in the windows of electronic stores, and from projectors balanced on fire escapes. We have watched alone in our apartments with our heads in our hands, shoulder to shoulder at bars where the signal flickers, alongside friends and family who we wish more than anything could be here today, sharing this moment. For 53 long years, we have watched the Knicks and we have waited. We waited as the memory of Willis Reed winning the championship on one leg grew fainter and fainter. We waited as Clyde came up clutch again and again. As John Starks dunked on Jordan and Patrick Ewing dunked on the Pacers. As Charles Oakley pulled every rebound within reach. As Spike got in Reggie Miller's face. As Allen Houston put up a shot against Miami that hung in the air for an eternity. As Larry Johnson gave us the 4-point play heard around New York. As Starbury traded threes with Kobe and then sold sneakers every kid could afford. As Nate Robinson stuffed Yao Ming. As the city came alive watching Linsanity. And as Melo lived every Brooklyn dreams when he came home and made MSG feel like the center of the universe once again. We waited without ever knowing if this day would come, and we waited because we knew deep down in our sick, suffering hearts that it would. New York City, this team has done it. The New York Knicks are NBA champions.
All right. It is Monday. It is 7 o'clock, and that means it is time for the Split Decision here on Facebook Live. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andrew Newman. It is Monday, June the 29th, 2026. We are wrapping up one of the more eventful months in my lifetime, both personally and as a sports fan. We are entering the week, or we're into the week of 4th of July, the 250th anniversary of the country. And we are back on for the first time in 2 weeks. We'll be on this week, we'll be on next week, and then the week after that, I will be on vacation. And there will not be a show, but we'll remind everybody of that next week and a little more today. Obviously it's a little spotty lately. We've been going pretty solidly with the show every week until I guess 3 weeks ago, when I just couldn't do a show, because it was the week of the wedding and too much was going on. And then did a show 2 weeks ago tonight, obviously just after the Knicks championship, and then no show last week because it was my wife's birthday, and we went out to dinner and enjoyed the evening. And here we are tonight, and we'll be on again next week. Summer schedule, there's probably going to be some time off between July and August days. There's no show just for various reasons as we enter a bit of a slower time of the year for sports, which of course never lasts long, where although this year the NFL season starts as late as it can. I don't think the first Sunday of NFL games is until the 13th or whatever. Now there's games, I'm sure, I know there's games Wednesday and Thursday of that week, but the actual Sunday, because I think Labor Day is not till the 7th this year. So we have another week than we might normally have, of sort of the summer slowdown before football starts and really dominates the landscape again. But, in the meantime, over the next couple of months, there will be a lot of baseball to touch on, and we'll get into the baseball in a little while. Obviously, as we get closer to the start of NFL season, we'll have more and more football as a it's been easy to lose sight of, but a potentially very interesting season, at least for the Giants and the Jets, but really the Giants with the first year under John Harbaugh, the second year of Jackson Dart, sort of the beginning of a new era for the Giants, and Whether that era will snap them out of this 15 years of futility, nobody quite knows, but there's certainly more optimism than there has been at any point in the last. I mean, I guess the year after they were in 23, 22, they were good. They got to the second round of the playoffs. So there was some very short-lived optimism going into 23, but I mean, sort of a longer-term optimism. This is the first time in a while. So, obviously as we get closer to that, we'll have a lot to talk about there. And baseball will sort of carry the day for the next little while, and we'll get to the Yankees. And, obviously if you're a big soccer fan, or really any, even a casual soccer fan, the World Cup, which just entered the round of 32, the knockout rounds, which, still is going to last for another 3 or 4 weeks. But, there's games, multiple games every day for the next several weeks, and they're all like tournament games. So they're not, they're not the standard soccer games where I believe 98% of every soccer game ever has gone to a draw. And I mean, obviously I'm poking a little fun at it. I'm not, what always happens with stuff like the World Cup is I can't really sit down and watch soccer, to be honest. Like, I can flip on the last couple minutes of something, especially but I can't watch a whole soccer game, but I can be kind of aware of what's going on. So I've been looking and I see this Germany Paraguay game is in overtime or extra time or whatever they call it. So I was like, I'm aware of, okay, the knockout round started yesterday, and I think the US plays on Wednesday, and and all of that. And obviously some people, it's the biggest sporting event in the world, so tons of people are super into it. And even in the US, it's very popular. Not quite my thing, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that it was going on at the moment. But, one way or another, if you're a North American sports fan, it's hard to dress up that we're not in the doldrums right now for a little while. When we were on the air 2 weeks ago, we talked about the Knicks, and I did about 40 minutes at the beginning of the show kind of talking about the experience of the Knicks winning a championship on my wedding night, and sort of the personal convergence of all of that. And then we got some calls, and we didn't have a ton of chances to actually get into sort of the game by game minutia of the finals. And I guess the moment has passed on that, to say like, well, in game 1, this happened, in game 2, this happened. But, before I'm ready to go like, well, let's move on from this, I do kind of, and we also have like current event Knicks stories to talk about with the impending free agency and some of the deals they've signed and all that. And we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But I did just, look, you're a sports fan, you're a fan of certain teams. The way I've always looked at it is like, as a fan, the goal is to root for your team to win a championship, and obviously, you kind of need to make your peace with enjoying them, even if that never happens. But, the goal as a fan is to see your team win a championship. And it sort of frustrates me. And I mean, I'm fortunate enough now in my adult life, forget about even the Super Bowl or the World Series the Yankees won when I was a kid. And obviously those are very special. I'm not saying forget about them. And also I was in 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. So it's not like I was 5 years old, and yeah, the Giants won 2 Super Bowls when I was technically alive, but one I was 6 months old and one I was 4 years old. So I don't remember either of those at all. But like in my adult life, the Giants won the Super Bowl when I was a senior in college, and then 4 years later when I was 25. The Yankees won in 2009 when I would have been 23 years old when they won, and now I've seen the Knicks win, a couple of weeks after I turned 40. So, I've been aware enough and sort of plugged in enough when they've won those, where like the thing I will never get as a fan, and I'm not talking about the players, I'm not talking about, people in the front office or, even the media, because I get, 3 days later, their story has to be about, the questions in the off season. But as a fan, to have your team win a championship, like, you should be dining out on that at the very least until the team plays again next year. You know, I still have game 4 and 5 DVR'd, and I'm sure soon I can online. If it won't be something official, probably, but I mean, I'm sure things will come out officially. But I'm sure also online I'll be able to get, you know, like a DVD collection of every playoff game. You know, the broadcasts of every playoff game by from some, you know, it won't be like an officially licensed source, but it'll be somebody selling them. You know, and then obviously all the different highlight videos and the parade footage, and I'll tell my story about the parade in a minute here. You know, I don't get the sort of like 2 weeks later being like, all right, I'm past it as a fan, being like, all right, I'm past it. Like, you know, what next? What are they going to do in the draft? What are they going to do in free agency? Like, you want to pay attention to that stuff, but like, I'm not, you know, championships as a fan should be forever for you. Like, you should still get a little kick out of, like, you know, and I won't even use the 07 Giants and the 11 Giants, although those certainly are the best example of it for me. But even like the 09 Yankees, like every now and then I'll go through and watch like the 09 World Series, you know, the last couple innings of the game 6 of the 09 World Series, or like you know, them winning the pennant against the Angels the round before, or, you know, whatever. Like, and then obviously there's the, you know, the 2 Giant ones, and then the Yankees ones when I was a kid were a huge deal to me, 96 especially. But you know, that to me is like the point of. Now, I'm not saying if the Knicks are in the Eastern Conference Finals next year, all I'm going to be thinking about is, yeah, but they won last year. Like, at that point, yeah, it can take center stage that the current team is currently playing for a championship or an Eastern Conference championship or whatever. But like, you kind of go like, this was only 16 days ago. Like, this should still not have faded from your mind as a fan of this team, who waited, you know, at the bare minimum 53 years, could be your whole life, which would be less than 53 years, but, you know, depending on percentages, like, even if you're old enough to remember the last one in 73, you've waited half a century for this one. Like, if I had told people, you know, in 2014 or 2018 or, you know, whatever, you know, when the Knicks win it, even 94, you know, whatever, like, so when the Knicks finally win a championship 2 weeks later, like, how often is it going to be in your mind? And you'd be like, it's still in my mind every day for a good amount of the day. And to me, I'm like, yep. And that's how it should be. So that's just kind of what, you know, just sort of the overall thing I wanted to touch on. So the parade, my friend Mike and I went down to the parade. I left here. I got up at like 10:05, and I got on a train that got me into Grand Central at like 6:40, and Mike got in maybe 10 minutes later. And we got on the train and we went down, and the only thing I would possibly have done different is basically our 2 choices were get off at Fulton Street or get off at Bowling Green, all the way in the southern end of the city. The beginning of the parade. Looking back on it, I probably would have said Bowling Green and gone all the way down, and maybe there would have been a little more room because it's a little less wide open of an area, or a little more wide open of an area. We got off at Fulton. We got upstairs. They basically had you cordoned off on the street we were on was John Street. Like, basically, as soon as you left the subway station, you were on that block. You couldn't even go backwards. Like, you couldn't go a block further away from the parade. You were like cordoned into that area. And it was like a muggy, soupy day. We were already like halfway up the block. Like, we were, you know, on the side street. We weren't getting anywhere near Broadway itself. And we're standing there, and we're there maybe 45 minutes. And, you're getting shuffled in and out, and you're getting shuffled and jostled and stuff. And I'm kind of like, all right, this is probably what it's going to be. And I was at the 2 Giant parades. I was at the Yankee parade. I was managed to get on Broadway both of those times. The Giant one in 2007, I actually had a really good view for. I mean, I was a little ways back, but I was probably like 7-8 people deep. It was definitely a much better situation than where I was. So we're standing there, and it's kind of bad, and it's getting more and more crowded, and you realize you're not going to have much of a, you're maybe going to have a 15-second view of each thing as it goes by if you're lucky. And it was really muggy, and there's a cop car on the right in front of where we're standing. We're right in front of the back of the car because it's facing away from Broadway. And it's running. So the exhaust is getting all over us and everything. And eventually you start to see people climbing on top of the car. And people, all of a sudden the officer comes rushing over, and he's kind of calm, saying, get off the car. And they're going can you at least turn it off? And he's like, I have a canine in there. I can't turn it off. It has to be on. And as he's kind of trying to dispel it, here comes some other hothead from halfway up the block, yelling and screaming and clearly looking to cause a problem. Now, my thing to the people who were on top of the car is what did you think was going to happen? You knew, and maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe they were trying to draw the guy over to tell him, you need to move, you need to turn this car off. But, so then he's on his radio saying we got to clear this. I got to get this car out of here right away. And Mike went to me, and he's got a bad back and everything, and he was just let's go back into the subway station for a while. I don't know that I can do this for long. So we went back into the subway station, and I was kind of I was not broken up about that. So then we're in the Fulton Street subway station, and we realize as we're kind of standing there, because it's a big subway station and it's above ground, and we realize oh crap, we have a great view from far away, but we have a good view of Broadway. We'll be able to see better in here than we would have out there. And we're kind of able to hang out in there. It's, air conditioned. We can actually sit, not in chairs, but kind of against the railing a little bit. And by this point it's 8:30, and Mike's why don't we just stay in here? And I'm yeah, let's do that. Let's stay in here. So we're in there maybe another half an hour, 20 minutes. And all of a sudden they come, you can't be in here. We have to clear this station, which was kind of crap because nobody's causing any problems. It wasn't too crowded for people who were actually taking the subway to move. They very easily could have let people just hang out in there, but of course not. So we're so what do we do? And they're you can go back out on the street for the parade. You can get on a train to leave, or you can go over there to that officer who will let you out. We thought he was going to let us out on the street, but past where it was blocked off for the parade. So we'd be a couple of blocks away. So he tells us where to go. We go to that officer. He starts yelling at us. And it's not just me and Mike. It's a few people. He starts kind of going, no, you can't be here. You got to get, if you're either going to go back on the street or get on the train. So we're all right, fine. We'll get on the train. Screw it. We'll go to Midtown. We'll find a bar that's open. We'll watch the parade at the bar. So we go stand by the train. 4 trains go by, 5 trains go by, 6 trains go by. They're not stopping because they're not trying to let more people off at these stations. So we're finally we go down to the next level to try to catch a different train. We can't catch a train there. And they're giving us a hard time for standing on the platform. These trains are not running right now. So finally it's you said to them, it's okay, you won't let us out, outside of the parade route. You won't let us stay in the station. And you won't let us get on a train. Those are the 3 places that I know how to occupy in space. What do you want us to do? And then finally one of the trains came, and I was just I don't care if this is going to Brooklyn. Let's just get on it. And luckily it went up a couple of stops into Manhattan. So then we just, we found a bar that said it opened at 10:30. It didn't actually open till 11, but at about 10:45, we all just kind of went in, and the guy was I think at that point figured he was defeated and just let us go in there. And, I got to sit there and have a few beers and a few beers. It was more than a few, if we're being honest. Watch the parade on TV with a bunch of Knicks fans on 40th Street, so nowhere near the parade, but it was everybody else who was in the same boat as us. And watch the parade and enjoy that with Knicks fans and, be in the city and everything. So it was, it was worth it. And honestly, as soon as I saw like the situation, my assessment of it later was not, oh, we should have gotten here earlier. My assessment was we shouldn't have even bothered trying to come down to the parade. We should have gotten into Midtown at 10 o'clock and just gone, I could have slept till 7 instead of 4:30 and just gone straight to a bar to watch the parade. And we could still have said we were down in New York City for the parade. We just weren't actually at the parade, but it was still a very enjoyable cap to the day to the season and to the week and everything. And, obviously we're a couple of weeks out from that now. And I was at the Met game on Saturday just because it had probably been like 8 years since I'd been to Citi Field. Maureen had never been to Citi Field. So we decided to go on Saturday, and, it was fun. It was a good, I don't want to say good game. They won, which was rare enough lately, but it was cool. It's a good thing to do. But then the next day, of course, OG Anunoby threw out the first pitch. I'm like, damn it. If we'd been there yesterday, we would have seen OG Anunoby. But, sort of bigger picture. And then what we'll do, we'll take a break at some point and we'll get into like the free agency stuff. But, if you really I feel like we have not yet closed the chapter around what we've just witnessed the last few months for the Knicks. If you just think about and you almost can't immediately put it into context, or you can't. You can't put it into context what we just witnessed, and we probably won't be able to do that for a while. But obviously the top line is just this, they haven't won a title in 53 years. They'd only ever won 2 championships. They hadn't been to a finals in 27 years, and they get there, they win it. They win it in, dominating fashion in terms of games, not in terms of the series itself. Every game was close. All of them involved the Knicks coming back from big deficits, especially in game 4, but even game 5, they were down, 16 or whatever. But they won round 1 in 6 games. And then after that, they lost one more game. And it was game 3 to the Spurs after they were up 2-0. They put to bed so many demons and so many narratives just in the course of a couple of weeks that it really was astounding to look back on and say it's all done now. The closest for me that I can come up with is the 2007 Giants, where it was all of a sudden it was oh yeah, Eli Manning is a Super Bowl winning quarterback now. That's going to dramatically change the story about he's only 4 years into the league at that point. And it was that is going to wildly alter the narrative around, him and the Giants drafting him and, vis-a-vis his brother, and whether he had what it took to be a franchise quarterback, and whether the Chargers robbed them blind in that trade. And, Tom Coughlin is a Super Bowl winning coach, and everything about whether he, his style or his, personality or whatever, that is all now a moot point. And I think with the Knicks, it's we've seen that, and this is just even so much more. When the Giants won the Super Bowl in 2007, they had won 17 years prior in 1990, and that's a long time. And it was, certainly so much happened in those 17 years. That would be if the Knicks winning this year had previously won in 2009. That's how little time had passed in the grand scheme of things. With the Knicks, it's you think about how many guys and how many stories were radically vindicated, all in positive fashion for the Knicks just in a couple of months. And I'll get to that in a minute. But so the big story in New York the last couple of weeks has been the Mets. And like I said, I was at the game Saturday. They fired their manager on, I want to say, Thursday or Friday of this week. They've obviously been kind of an unmitigated disaster. And I was joking with people on Thursday, Friday of this past week, saying it's kind of interesting to see New York return to its like sports equilibrium. Like, obviously the last 3 months, it's been nothing but the Knicks, the Knicks day in and day out. And especially as the rounds got further and further along. And, I've talked about this the last couple of weeks and stuff, but just how cool it's been to see, places that, years ago, not that long ago, where you'd go in and say like, hey, can you turn the Knick game on? And they wouldn't even know what channel that was, or if they got that channel, like bars and stuff. And now it's just everything. I'd always heard and talked about how, in the 90s, like when the Knicks are good, it's the Knicks town. And, it's, when I say town, I mean the New York metropolitan area. Like, when the Knicks are clicking, they capture the city like nobody else. And I'd always sort of repeated that line from the early to mid 90s, even into the late 90s. And, my brother always would talk about how Pat Riley used to be on WFAN every Knick game. Like before every game, Mike and the Mad Dog would do like an interview with them, like how they have the managers of the baseball teams and the coaches of the football teams on once a week. Like, and there was a 15-year period where like the Knicks got a passing mention once every couple of weeks on the New York sports talk radio show. So like, even though I always parroted that thing of like, well, when the Knicks are good, they capture the city unlike anybody else, I didn't know if that would still be true. And, because the Yankees became this whole other entity in the late 90s that sort of sustained itself. The Yankees became, and then the Mets too, but like they became 12-month-a-year topics in like New York sports media. And football is football. And even though the Giants and Jets have been a joke, there's always going to be a ton of coverage in football. And then there's just everything is so much more national now that you didn't know for sure. And we kind of saw whispers of it the last bunch of years as the Knicks got better and they became a perennial, at least second round of the playoffs team. And then, when they beat Boston last year and got to the Eastern Conference Finals, it went up a whole nother level in terms of attention. And then this year, it sort of kept building on itself, where by the time they got to the Eastern Conference Finals, you could feel people who maybe, obviously you were always going to have the people who like used to be big Knicks fans or, would tell you, I haven't watched a game in 10 years or whatever, but I used to love the Knicks or whatever. You knew gradually you'd get some of those people back, but then just the people who like, you would never have thought would have had anything to say about NBA basketball, talking about the Knicks. The number of people who talk to me at like about different, like at work or stuff about like, oh, did you go to the parade? And like, that kind of stuff. Oh, I had friends like, older women who would say like, yeah, a couple of my friends went to the parade. And it's like, I didn't realize it had that reach. You know what I mean? And to just see sort of the city just, and when I say the city, I mean like the sporting aspect of the city reaching into where I live, where I'm from, the whole sort of surrounding area, like to see that not just from a sports context, but in a lot of ways, just from a cultural context, like a local cultural context, was all about the Knicks for at least the Eastern Conference Finals and the finals and the ensuing championship celebrations. So it's been interesting to see the city in the last 2 weeks kind of return to its normal equilibrium for late June, which is people being apoplectic about the Mets. And I was saying, it's like, finally we're at a point where like we're at where we are where we would be in the sporting conversation now in New York. We're in the same place we would be for the first time in months if the Knicks had lost in the second round of the playoffs, or if the Knicks were still a terrible team that hadn't sniffed the playoffs. Like, everything between March and a week ago would have been different. But this last week, we'd be back to where we are now, which is people killing the Mets. And to be honest, the last couple of days killing the Yankees, and justifiably so. But, it was and there still will be more that will happen, obviously, as we get to it's not going to be long. It's going to be, and they had the draft, and we'll talk a little about the NBA draft sort of, and we'll do all that in the next segment. But like, it won't be long because it's late June. So like you start getting into September and it'll be almost training camp time and, preseason. And then when the season starts, you would imagine the Knicks will be home on opening night. Oklahoma City was home on opening night this year. You would imagine they'll be, the first game of the year, they'll get the rings, they'll do the banner. They'll probably play another Eastern Conference contender, whether it's Boston or Detroit or Cleveland or somebody like that. But obviously a lot of the sort of active new content celebration is done. But, just to talk about what I was getting at before with the narrative stuff, like if you think about just in the last couple of weeks, I'm not suddenly on the camp that James Dolan is this great owner, right? But we have to at least acknowledge that in the last 5 to 6 years, he has brought in a guy who essentially from the ground up, all due respect to Mitchell Robinson, who's, was there the whole time and, one or two, but like built this team into a championship team. So Dolan is now forever an owner who won a championship. There's always there's footage of him holding up the Larry O'Brien trophy and being at the parade and whatever you think about Jim Dolan as a guy, as an owner, and I think all of that to varying degrees is still true, but like there's always going to be that caveat of like he did win a championship. The decision to fire Tom Thibodeau goes from a year ago at this time or 13 months ago at this time, a decision that even the people who were in support of it, and I did a whole show on that, when it happened and kind of worked through my thoughts and came down on the side of like, man, it is a high risk maneuver because you are going to look like a clown if this team doesn't at least get back to the Eastern Conference Finals next year. But you can also talk me into him having taken the team as far as it would go, to then a couple of weeks later when it was actually Mike Brown and it was like, man, this is an underwhelming hire. And I think all the way through this year, at least until they got to the finals, it was a controversial, still a move that a lot of people thought the jury was out on. I think with each passing round of the playoffs this year, you saw the way Mike Brown coached the team and the flexibility and sort of willingness to adapt. I think by the finals, I'd be surprised if too many people still were like, they shouldn't have made that move. And then he coaches them to a championship. And, they got behind in every single game and, they won. And a lot, you can't dismiss the coach on that. The one game when Alvarado played. So, that decision is immediately, is totally 100% vindicated. Mike Brown's narrative personally is as a championship coach now. And this is a guy who was fired by the Sacramento Kings 2 years ago. His one claim to fame as a head coach was he got the Cavs with LeBron to a championship and they got to a finals. They got swept, and then underachieved a couple years in a row and LeBron was gone. Leon Rose, and we talked about this, Leon Rose goes into in a lot of ways, the pantheon of New York sports executives. I think you would have to put him in that, certainly in the, quote unquote modern era of GMs and team presidents. He goes right up there with a bunch of those guys. And then from a player standpoint, you talk about Karl Anthony Towns, who first there was the whole thing of the narrative around that trade to begin with. They traded for him and they gave up Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. And then you'd hear people go, Randle was one thing, but DiVincenzo was another thing. And it was like, Randle was obviously a controversial, Randle was obviously a sort of player that people had varying opinions on. And for a long time, Randle was kind of the whipping boy of fans, myself included, where it was like, this guy is not, consistent enough. He's not good enough. And then his last year with the team, he was really, really good, which was great because it allowed them to make the trade. Consequently, you feel bad for him like a week ago getting traded to the Nets in the midst of all of this. Maybe he's happy to be coming back to New York, but that's a tough break for him in this environment to be coming back to the city that, basically coming back to Knicks Championship Central. So, immediately vindicates that trade. Vindicates times 10 that trade. Because Towns, he did not finish the finals strong. During that 13-game win streak, Towns was their best player. Through that whole run, on average, he was their best player. Towns himself as a player obviously proved that he can be a top 2 guy on a championship team. And then there's Brunson and Jalen Brunson, who, I think as recently as a couple of months ago, a lot of fans that are not Knicks fans, but NBA fans would have said that, and they would have been wrong about this, but they would have at least not been immediately laughed out of the room, that, well, he's a product of sort of the New York hype machine, and he's a good player, but he's not the lead dog on a championship team. And, he gets a lot more, he's a product of favorable whistles and playing for the Knicks and whatever. And now it's like anyone who still actually believes that, there might be some people who still sit on that opinion, but it is a fringe and discredited opinion now. So just in the, it's amazing just how quickly that all can happen. So with that, we'll take a break. We'll come back. I want to get to the actual off season for the Knicks. A couple of stray thoughts on just the NBA draft sort of in execution, and then we'll come back and we'll keep going with that. So play some more scenes from the Knicks victory parade, and we'll be back in a few minutes to keep things going. 845-416-8704 is the number if you want to call in. Otherwise, we'll see you in just a few minutes on a split decision.
We are here not just because of this team that will go down in New York City legend. I'm talking about guys like Ronaldo Balkman, Marty Collins, Raymond Felton, Marcus Camby, Kristaps Porzingis, J.R. Smith, Iman Shumpert, and the whole Knicks tape era. I'm talking about guys like Tony Douglas, who I watched tie the single-game franchise record for threes from the stands in 2011. I'm talking about Amari, who got this whole city fired up when he joined. And I'm talking about Jared Jeffries and Lance Thomas and Langston Galloway, players who gave everything every game, even when a 20-win season was all that was in sight. This championship belongs to them too, because championships aren't just built in one season. It belongs to Emmanuel Quickley, R.J. Barrett, Dante DiVincenzo, Julius Randle, and also to a coach who helped lay the groundwork, Tom Thibodeau. Thanks to each of these New Yorkers and too many others to name, New York City has just had two of the most magical months in as long as any of us can remember. Over these past weeks, as the Knicks kept winning, our city has come together as one. Neighbors invited neighbors over. Strangers high-fived one another in the street. Subway conductors sang their announcements and bus drivers danced behind the wheel. So often when this city comes together, it is because we are forced to, by a moment of tragedy or adversity. What a gift it is to be brought together by pure, unfiltered joy. For as long as we live, we will remember this feeling of a city together, a city alive, a city overcome by happiness. But let's not pretend that this was inevitable. If you will allow me, I want to travel back in time 8 days. Game 4, 9 minutes and 33 seconds left in the fourth quarter. The Knicks are down 20. The analytics guys, the sports betting companies, the pundits who watch from far away, they do what they do. They run the numbers. They calculate the odds. They write the Knicks off. They give the Spurs a 99.6% chance of winning the game. A 99.6% chance of tying up the series 2-2, of reclaiming the momentum with the next game in San Antonio. A 99.6% chance of silencing the Garden, of another year of watching and waiting. But there is one thing that the pundits just don't get about this team, that they just don't get about this city. It is in that 0.4% that we go to work. It is in that 0.4% that Jalen Brunson, the same guy that so many said was too small, proves that not only is he good enough, he is the new standard for greatness. It is in that 0.4% that OG Anunoby watches the ball float from the top of the arc and start running toward the basket, fingers reaching towards the heavens. It is in that 0.4% that Karl Anthony Towns finds the strength to mourn his mother and still pull in rebound after rebound, make block after block. It is in that 0.4% that Jose Alvarado shows every kid.
All right, back here live on the Split Decision on Facebook Live here on this Monday, June the 29th, 2026. I will play some more stuff from the parade as we move along here, but I just, like I said, figured can't hurt to just keep going on with it, and I'm going to actually post my show back to Facebook because I don't know if it went through correctly the first time. So let's do that. There we go. All right. So a couple other things to get through here. As we sort of turn to the Knicks, what's next for the Knicks? You know what I mean? And, you know, as I talked about in the opening, I'm not one who's inclined to focus that much on that as a fan just yet. You know, I still want when I want to talk about like the off season and the plan for going forward, that's not me turning the page. Like I'm still going to be constantly living in that in the last couple of months as a Knicks fan for quite a while longer, but we do need to, for the sake of doing a sports talk show here, we do need to at least discuss the offseason moves so far and potential decisions still to be made. So the good news for the Knicks is the core of the team is absolutely going to return. You know, every starter is under contract. Brunson obviously took that incredibly team-friendly deal a couple of years ago. And, you know, credit for Mike Brown, by the way, in the post-game, I think it was after Game 5, the press conference, where he basically said, like, he left. I wouldn't have done that if I was him. And no player should be expected to do that. But, you know, there's no doubt that him doing that was a huge part of why the Knicks were such a complete and deep team this year, was that he was willing to take less money to, you know, free up the Knicks to be able to sign depth guys for different, to sign more depth guys and, you know, to get OG Anunoby's deal done particularly, and et cetera, et cetera. So that is obviously the top of the line news is Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Towns, and Hart are all coming back next year. You know, no question about it. They are coming back next year. The NBA, obviously, everything becomes about the cap and the weirdness that relates to the NBA's, you know, salary cap structure, where it's not a salary cap. It's a, you have a salary cap, but you can be over it, and it just restricts what you can do. And then recently, in the last few years, they have created this thing where there's a second apron. And the second apron, I'm trying to pull up exactly what the second apron does, just so I can quote it accurately. But essentially, you can be over the cap. That's the first apron. Then you get into the second apron, and it really hampers what you can do. And this article is from BetMGM. I'm going to trust it to be legit on the information here, even if I'm not wild about the source. So team can now have 3 financial statuses: good standing, penalty 1, or penalty 2. Second penalty status is the new second apron status. So if you're in the first apron, and this is the traditional just being over the cap, teams can only acquire, sign, and trade players if they move them below the apron. Teams who execute a trade must match salaries within 110% of the outgoing obligation. So in other words, if you make a trade, you have to, you can't be taking back significantly more salary than you're sending out. Teams cannot sign any players waived during the regular season if their salary is greater than the mid-level exception. Now, if you get into the second apron, teams do not have access to the taxpayer mid-level exception. Teams cannot use trade exceptions created when combining the salaries of multiple players. Teams cannot use trade exceptions from any prior year. Teams lose the ability to trade first-round draft picks that are 7 years in the future. If teams remain in the second apron for any 3 years in a 5-year period, their upcoming first-round draft pick is automatically moved to the end of the first round. So it is very punitive, and I can't pretend to understand all of it, but it severely restricts what you can do. James Dolan was on WFAN, I think the day before the parade. So it was only a couple of days after the championship. And he came out and said, we cannot go into the second apron. And look, do I want him saying that? No. Do I want to be ever I was willing to deal with the fact that, I had to see James Dolan on the podium holding the trophy. And I had to listen to him at the parade make a brief, set of remarks. I do not want to go back as a Knicks fan to having to constantly think about and talk about James Dolan. Do I wish he was giving interviews on WFAN where he was telegraphing what the Knicks are going to do and what they're not going to do? No, I would like that to not be a thing that happens. That said, it is reasonable for an owner or a team to take the position of not wanting to go into the second apron. I don't know that it's something I want them to commit to never doing at all costs. And you'd like to believe that should the right thing come up, the Knicks will entertain the idea of going into the second apron, at some point. I don't think it's a never do this thing, but I also understand that it's not like baseball where the only difference is a luxury tax. And I don't care how much luxury tax the owners have to pay. I want my team spending enough money, especially in this context where my team is the Yankees and the Yankees can absolutely afford to spend that kind of money. And them not doing it has no team building ramifications. It's just that the owners don't want to spend the money. I am sure that is part of this when it comes to the Knicks, but we also need to acknowledge that being in that second apron comes with actual penalties. So, again, do I wish he was saying it out loud in the media at the start of guys negotiating? No, I would like that to not be a factor in this, but obviously, he's put that comment out there, and like I said, the act of not wanting to go over the apron, I don't think is that outrageous. So that left the Knicks with some other things they had to do. They did just today sign Landry Shamet. He returns to the Knicks on a 4-year, $24 million. So basically you look at, the Knicks had their 5 starters who we mentioned are all locked up. They're going to try and do a bigger, longer-term deal with Towns to maybe get him, a little more long-term security, but also maybe structure the deal in a way that's a little more team-friendly for the Knicks in the immediate future. He's got a player option for the 27-28 season, so this would be his last year at this contract, and then he would have a player option for 27-28. So he's due to make $57 million this year and $61 million the year after. If they could somehow stretch that 3 or 4 more years out and maybe lower the annual value, that would be great. You'd have to imagine he wants to stay where he's at and, maybe get a deal done. So, again, I don't expect them to leave $100 million on the table like Jalen Brunson did, but, you're optimistic they can work out something a little longer term with him. Alvarado had a player option, which he exercised, but the Knicks have come to an agreement with him. So of the bench unit, Alvarado, you got McBride, who's still on a very team-friendly rookie deal, I believe. He's only set to make $4 million this year. Alvarado, they have re-upped, and now Landry Shamet, they have re-upped. So that's 8 of their top 10 from this year. And they also did, I guess, work out a deal with Peckhome.ea. So sort of the 2 guys you think about left are Jordan Clarkson and then Mitchell Robinson. And I'm looking at it. I'm trying to find a nice breakdown of the status of everything. So the free agency period opens tomorrow at 6 p.m. That's like when the legal tampering, or I guess it's not even tampering. You can't sign anybody for like 10 days. But so Clarkson, it's up in the air if Clarkson will be able to come back. Obviously at this point in his career, if Jordan Clarkson, Clarkson remains a possibility to re-sign with the Knicks, adding that he can't rule out that reunion. Clarkson would return on another veteran minimum deal, which makes him cap friendly. I think if that's the deal, the Knicks would be willing to do it. I don't know how much beyond that they'd be willing to do. And then the bigger story is Mitchell Robinson. And this is where it gets tough for me because I don't want to pretend I'm a cap expert or, that I know all the ramifications of this. But basically, here's the deal with Mitchell Robinson. He would be the one that they would have to go over the second apron to sign. And when I was saying I don't think they should rule out going over the second apron, but I also don't think it's something to take lightly. I don't think Mitchell Robinson is the caliber of guy that I would be willing to go over the second apron to re-sign. He is a very, very important player to the Knicks this year. The fact that they were able to get him through the whole season without being hurt was a huge bonus for them. Having him healthy in the playoffs, there were games where teams just did not have an answer for him in the playoffs. He grabbed one of the biggest rebounds you'll ever see, getting that offensive rebound off the missed free throw. The Knicks missed a lot of free throws at the end of Game 5. Rewatching Game 5 as many times as I have, they went to the line 4 times at the end of the game, and each time they made 1 out of 2. Now, thank God they made 1 out of 2 each time, but they just kept going to the line and missing free throws. He is a player that brings something to the table that nobody else really can. And he is a great guy to have on your team. And he's been the longest standing Knick. And, certainly if there were a way for the Knicks to keep him, I would certainly welcome that. But he is also a very limited player. First of all, just if we look at games played, I said they got him through this year healthy. They got him through this year healthy because they seriously limited his minutes. He only played 19.6 minutes per game. He only played 60 games. They did not play him in back-to-backs at any point this season. It was not even a question. He did not play back-to-backs. So he missed a quarter of the season. He was healthy, but part of keeping him healthy involved him sitting a quarter of the season. I don't care about that. I think it was obviously the correct decision for the Knicks. He averaged, again, 20 minutes a game. He averaged how many points a game? He averaged just under 6 points a game, just under 9 rebounds a game. He was, had games where he was a force out there that nobody had any answers for. He's also not a guy who's going to, bring a ton of offensive presence in terms of actual points and shooting. And, they're going to foul him. Every time he's on the floor, he's a threat for them to foul him. And this is not a thing where a guy was really bad at free throws early in his career and has gradually gone from an F to a D+ where, He's still not a great free throw shooter, but he's clearly gotten better at it. If you look at his free throw percentage through the years, and some of these are probably not full years, so I don't want to go, but like his first year, 60%, second year, 56%, third year, 49%, 48%, 48%, 40%. Last year, 68%, but he played in 17 games last year. I'm going to guess he barely shot. He probably took like 20 free throws last year. And then this year, he was a 40% free throw shooter. So it's not like, he's a poor free throw shooter. He's the worst free throw shooter in the NBA. He also last year, not this season, the season before that, played 17 games. The year before that, played 31 games. Relatively healthy the couple of years before that, and he's still young. He'll be 28 next year. If you're going to sign him and go into the second apron, you're doing so for a player who does certain things very, very well, but also brings a lot of baggage with him. I don't mean personal baggage, although there's obviously something going on, but whatever. Just baggage as a player. So I understand the argument of who cares, go into the second apron, bring him in. You're then also, if he gets hurt, think about how much you've just limited yourself in the ability to sign anybody else, to make any kind of trade. He's not going to take a 1-year deal. I think, with the other priorities of just your regular depth, guys like Shamet and Alvarado, you hope, and this is not about Ariel Hukporti. Obviously, if Robinson goes, they're going to need a veteran big man, who can play, get some minutes behind Towns, and, maybe you bring Hukporti along, but like this idea of like, do whatever it takes at all costs to bring back Mitchell Robinson, I just don't know if that's actually wise. You know what I mean? I understand the impulse is try to bring everybody back from this championship team. But when you factor in the realities of what that would mean for them, and who knows if Robinson even, he could hit the open market and be offered something, that the Knicks couldn't match even if they wanted to. But I think they had to make a decision, and I'm looking at an article from today. New York Knicks have officially bought 2 key members of their 2026 NBA championship winning squad back, with Jose Alvarado and Landry Shamet both intending to sign multi-year deals. That leaves Jordan Clarkson and Mitchell Robinson as the only member of the Knicks rotation without contracts. If the Knicks truly plan to stay under the salary cap second apron, that limits how much they can afford to Robinson. New York has only $8.7 million left to offer Robinson and fill out the rest of the roster next season. Unless the big man is willing to forgo the larger offers he'll presumably get from teams such as the Lakers, the Knicks might have to prepare to lose their defensive anchor. Teams that win the NBA championships inherently earn the chance to run it back. The Knicks, however, I think they're really trying to set Dolan up to be the bad guy here, and I get he's an easy target, but like, I doubt if Leon Rose is hell-bent on bringing Mitchell Robinson back and going into the second apron, I have a feeling he would win that argument with James Dolan. I get the impression that was more James Dolan repeating what Leon Rose was telling him about what their plans are. And again, I wish James Dolan wasn't saying anything at all, but that's the impression I get, is not that he's dictating to Leon Rose. He, I'm sure, has opinions. I don't think Leon Rose is inclined to do that. So, that's sort of an, obviously we'll keep an eye on it. We'll see what the Knicks do. I would like it if they could bring Robinson back, but I don't know. I feel like people are glossing over his limitations and the fact that you really can't have him out on the floor at the end of the game, because if they foul him, you're screwed. Like, I mean, you can when you're going offense, defense, but like, I don't know. If they bring back, let's say they do get Clarkson back and they get, some replacement, not replacement to Robinson, but some very generic run of the mill level big man, to get some minutes. Like, I would be fine with that. Bringing back most of this team. Because again, you don't want to lose sight of the fact they're bringing back their entire starting five and at least 3 of their top 5 other guys off the bench. So anyway, I just figured I would touch on that. The Knicks in the draft did everything they could to not make a selection in the draft. They traded down 5 different times in the draft, and I think ended up with a couple of guys that, who knows, one of them I think is overseas, and the Knicks may have picked him purposely so that he would stay overseas and they wouldn't have to worry about signing a draft pick. I don't know if that's actually the case. It certainly seems like it was the case with how many trades they made. Overall, with the NBA draft, it's really a little crazy how, I do think they really need to, not even the draft itself, but sort of the way the draft is presented is really kind of puzzling. First of all, I mean, the only real comp is the NBA NFL draft. I guess you could say the hockey draft, but really the NBA and NFL drafts are the 2 highest profile drafts because those are the drafts, G League aside, where guys are coming straight to the team. But it's become almost this sort of I was trying to explain it to Maureen, the rosters are so small in the NBA and the rotations are even smaller that veteran teams really don't have much use for a rookie. Unless the Knicks had a top 5 pick this year, where are they going to give minutes to a rookie from? You're going to have your starters and then you're going to have your top 3 guys off the bench. To have a rookie on the roster to play 5 minutes a game, if that, and, get in during garbage time really isn't worth the roster spot. And that's unique to basketball compared to all the other sports. Baseball would be close if there weren't minor leagues, because a lot of times you see in baseball where they have a rookie, where there's a guy who's he's the second best shortstop. He's better than the guy they have as their backup utility infielder, or he'd be their 4th outfielder, but they'd rather him play every day in AAA than not play at all, and sit the bench, then get a couple at bats a week on the major league roster. It's similar to that, except there's really not, there's the G League, but the Knicks really, it sounds weird and short-sighted to say, but a team like the Knicks really has no use for a rookie except to fill out the bottom spots of the roster. You know what I mean? So they didn't want to be stuck with a 1st-round draft pick and a guaranteed, somebody they had to guarantee a contract to. They wanted to acquire future assets, really. A 2nd-round pick in 2029 is much more valuable to the Knicks than having an actual player from the 2nd round this year. But they did end up with a couple of guys. But you also just have this whole ridiculous thing they do that somehow the NFL has figured out decades ago, and the NBA still insists on this thing of they won't let trades become official. They used to never let them become official till after the draft. Now they they're not official, but they announce them later on. But you have these guys getting picked. There was a thing this year where there was a guy being interviewed wearing a Pistons hat, and the guy in ESPN, I think it was Windhorst, basically broke the news to him that he was actually going to Memphis, and he had no idea. And it's this sort of theater. It got to the point where I was just with the Knicks, I mean, again, the Knicks are in a little bit different of a situation, but I'm tomorrow I'll just figure out who they actually ended up with, because I can't track all this right now. The other thing too is in the 2nd round, literally 29 of the 30 picks in the 2nd round were traded either before the draft, during the draft, after the guy was picked, his rights were traded away. And in a lot of cases, 2 of those things, and in some cases, all 3. There was 1 pick in the 2nd round of the NBA draft. It was Toronto's pick. That was just Toronto earned that pick. They never traded it. They picked a guy and they kept that guy. 1 out of 30. And I think if you were to look at the 1st round, probably half the picks were traded away. So you end up with 15 or 16 picks out of 60 that were actually made by the team who's initially had that selection. So it is a very difficult thing. And especially then when you factor in teams who would really much rather stockpile assets than actually take a player, it just becomes this very Byzantine system of trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And usually it's easier to just give up at some point. So, we'll put the NBA aside for a little while, except to periodically just remark about the fact that the Knicks are the world champions. That will probably not be stopping anytime soon. That we will just kind of remark upon that. Obviously, free agency will start to kick up soon. From a Knicks standpoint, you don't expect any large trades to be made, or free agent signings. Really, what happens with Robinson? But I think at this point, it pretty much forecloses the chance that Mitchell Robinson's coming back to the Knicks. Clarkson and that kind of stuff, but there's not going to be any blockbuster moves. There were two big trades. We mentioned the Julius Randle coming to the Nets deal, and then there was the Ball trade to from Charlotte to where the hell did he end up going? Let me get this trade down. I guess the trade isn't official yet. Pro career, sorry. Who the hell? Sorry. Give me 1 second while I try to figure this out. Whatever. I can't figure this out. I'll figure this out later. But, you're starting to see that. And then you'll see pretty soon we'll see lots of free agency moves and all that. And then we'll have what we usually have later on in the off season or at the beginning of next season when stars start demanding trades because they're unhappy. Obviously, the Giannis deal would be the big one. We have to mention Giannis too. Actually, let's spend a few minutes on that and then we'll take a break. So Giannis gets traded to Miami. And, we knew going into the draft that it would be, he was going to get traded that day and it was going to be either Boston or Miami. And he ends up going to Miami and let's get the exact thing looked up here. The exact trade was Giannis and Bobby Portis to the Heat for Tyler Hero, Khalil Ware, Jamie Jaquez Jr., Kasparis Giacchionis, 3 first-round picks, including number 13 in Tuesday's draft that just passed, 1 pick swap, and 1 second-round pick. Heat are sending to Milwaukee unprotected first-rounders in 31 and 33, along with number 13, a pick swap in 2030, and a second-rounder, according to sources, in 2033. So, obviously, we all knew this was coming for quite a while now. And, the team that may come out of this the worst is the Celtics because they didn't get him, but they also dangled Jaylen Brown on a hook for so long that now they basically have to trade Jaylen Brown. And look, I'm not somebody who the Celtics are going to scare me as long as they're the Celtics and have that little leprechaun like that. They're always going to scare me. But if you think about just kind of like the roller coaster of the Celtics the last year and a half, 2 years, it's like they win that championship. The next year, they're really, really good. They have that series against the Knicks. Tatum tears his ACL or his Achilles. He's going to be out the whole year. Then suddenly they have this great year that nobody was expecting this past year. Tatum comes back. It's like they righted the ship. They're, the favorites in the Eastern Conference going into the playoffs. They get upset in the first round. They try to trade for Giannis. They annoy Jaylen Brown to the point where he probably is going to have to be traded now. And who knows? Now, again, if they go 58 and 24 next year, would it surprise me? Not particularly. If they go 64 and 18, it wouldn't surprise me particularly. But, just an interesting situation. But, I think it's a good move for the Heat. I think it's a move the Heat who have sort of been in the star business for a long time, but really have not been that team for several years now. I know they were in the finals twice, once in the bubble and then once in, 23? Yeah, when they lost to Denver, I believe that was. Yeah, it was like right as I moved in here. But, the Butler thing kind of exploded and, they haven't had any like huge signings the last few years, and they've been kind of like a lower 9, 10, 7, 8 kind of playoff team the last few years. Uncommon for them, uncharacteristic for them. So they get a big star. They get, they make a big splash. It'll rejuvenate Giannis's career. It obviously makes the Heat, shoots them into the upper echelon of Eastern Conference contenders for next year. But there's sort of a sense that both for the Bucks especially, and maybe even for Giannis, the trade got made a year too late. It's hard to divorce the fact that for the last year and a half, Knicks fans have been sort of like coveting him as the final piece to a championship puzzle. And, man, can Towns play well enough where we could convince the Bucks to take Towns for Giannis, and then the Knicks win a championship? And, I did have somebody briefly say to me in the week between then, like, would you still do a Giannis trade? And I'm like, man, I don't think so. I don't think so. Just because we saw what the ceiling of this Knicks team was, and it was winning a championship. So we don't need to worry about would he raise the ceiling for them. At best, he could keep it where it is. He's also a guy who now has had several years of significant time lost due to injuries. Let's just pull up his stats. Obviously this year there was sort of the controversy about whether he was healthy enough to play, and the Bucks were holding him out. But he played only 36 games this year, the year that just ended. 67 the year before. 63. He's going to play in the low 60s in games. He'll be 32 years old next year, so certainly not old by NBA standards, but definitely since he's been playing since he's 19, he's put a lot of miles on his he's got a lot of miles already. And you can point to guys like LeBron still playing at a high level at 40, but like A, they're the exception, and B, they're not 7 feet tall like Giannis is. So I'm not saying he's done or he's cooked or anything, but like, certainly there's the argument to be made that he's played his best basketball already. For the Bucks, you really get the sense they waited a year too long to do this. They didn't buy anything by keeping him last year. All they did was make the divorce that much more acrimonious. They didn't contend at all this year. The window really was over a couple of years ago. And they probably got less. There was less suitors for him. Obviously, what happened with not that the Knicks were ever going to be able to put together an attractive package for him, but obviously what happened with the Knicks took a major suitor away from the sweepstakes in the Knicks. It became clear that they had to trade him, which was going to limit their leverage, because the option of like, well, we're only going to do this if we're blown away, otherwise we'll just keep him, was gone. You kind of wonder if they were going to wait until even the fan base realized they had to trade him, so there wasn't like a revolt. I think the Bucks, and you could say, oh, it's 50 years ago, but like, I think the specter of what happened with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar still looms large. And then I think also just the fact that, it's the Bucks are a franchise with some history, but the idea that the Bucks were like won a championship 5 years ago and were like kind of the center of the NBA, for a couple of years there, and were one of the best teams year in and year out, was directly attributable to the fact that they had Giannis. And if there was a sense that they traded him to save money, you can see where the fan base would revolt. And I nobody would ever admit this, but I kind of wonder if this year was sort of, not that they sabotaged the season, but like this was the year they were looking for, where they could say like, look at how far we are away from contending. We need to rebuild. This isn't about cost cutting. This isn't about saving money. This is we're not blowing up a contender, to try and get draft picks. We are literally like, everybody agrees it is time to move on at this point. So like, if this got easier for them in any way, it was that. Now, the fact that they're going to be terrible for quite a while, I think probably mitigates some of that. But, I do think there's probably a much smaller contingent than there would have been even a few months ago of people arguing that they should have kept him. Obviously, you're going to have some people who just never want to see the star player go, but I think most people at this point would be sentimentality aside, for the good of the franchise, it's time. So with that, let's take another break. We'll come back. We'll get into some baseball. I see the Yankees are getting the shit kicked out of them again today. And then we'll keep things going for a little while. I'm not sure if we'll go all the way to 9. Probably not. I don't know if there's 40 minutes of stuff left to talk about. But if somebody wants to call
this roasted salmon with the Mediterranean
8704 is the number to do so. In the meantime, let's see if we can pull up. Can we get Mike Woodson's speech? Let's do that. There's a lot of local politicians talking in this. There's Dolan. There's Leon. I think they go to let's no. I said Mike Woodson. I meant Mike Brown.
Head coach
Let's get
of the
Mike
Knicks,
Brown
Mike
on the
Brown.
phone here, or on the air here from the parade last 2 Thursdays ago.
What's up, New York? Hey, first of all, I'd like to thank the governor and the mayor for doing this for us. I'm proud of Mr. Dolan, Leon and his staff, all the players, all the coaches, Jamal, the front office side, all the Knick alumni that I see out there. We appreciate you guys. Pat Ewing, I got to give you a shout out. You've been with us this whole journey. I want to thank everybody. I'm proud of everybody for helping accomplish this great feat. The energy today and all around New York is off the charts. And I want to thank you all for it. Let's keep this energy going, baby, because this championship is about you guys. This is New York City's championship. I will say this, I'm so proud of our guys from the top to the bottom. There was a lot of hard work that we put in, starting with the off season, going into the season. A lot of stuff that you guys don't see behind the scenes. Guys busting their behinds, not just our players, our medical staff, keeping those guys healthy. No, let's give them a round of applause for sure. At the beginning of the year, I had everybody sign a contract. And I didn't want you to sign the contract if you didn't believe in it. But it was about sacrifice. You saw our team sacrifice time after time after time after time throughout the course of the year. You saw our team stay connected through the most adverse times through the course of the year. We had our ups, we definitely had our downs, and our group stayed connected through those times. You saw it every time we hit the floor. It didn't matter who was suited up. Our guys brought a competitive spirit that obviously was unmatched, and that's why we're the 2026 NBA championship. You saw the belief in each other. It didn't matter whose number I called. Guys could be Jordan Clarkson. He didn't play for 2 months. He stuck with it. His teammates believed in him. He believed in the process. They believed in each other. And we all held each other accountable. That's the standard of what it was to be a New York Knick in 25-26, and that's why we're champions today. Playing in front of you guys when we had our ups was fantastic, but you're the most knowledgeable fan base in the whole NBA. Your guys' energy when we had our downs was off the charts, and I want to thank you for it. There's nothing better than walking into the iconic building of MSG and getting down night after night after night in front of you guys. You guys made us feel the energy and brought us over the hump when we didn't feel like playing or when our game wasn't at the top. Again, I'd like to thank all the players. I can go down the line with all their accomplishments. They were huge throughout the course of the year. But at the end of the day, I want to thank you guys. Because without you, this wouldn't be possible. Let's go one time. Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs dogs out. I love you, New York.
And now time to hear from the 2026 NBA Finals MVP and the captain of the Knicks, Jalen Brunson.
I don't know how many times I got to tell Mike to stop doing that shit. Sorry.
I just wanted to let it roll to that because it does legitimately seem to really annoy Jalen Brunson that Mike Brown keeps doing that "who let the dogs out" thing. But I just figured I would play that because it was funny that Brunson got up and that was the first thing he said. And I saw a clip today that I guess Brown is on their podcast this week, Brunson and Hart's podcast, and there's a clip of him doing that again, and Brunson with his head in his hands. So I just figured that was a good place to leave off. So we've talked a lot about the NBA. Let's talk some baseball. It's been a long time since we've talked much baseball, but we are getting close to the All-Star break already. I think there's less than 2 weeks until the All-Star break. The Yankees, we've not talked much about the Yankees, and this would have been a different story even like a week ago. They've had their ups and downs. They were red hot for a while, little bit of a swoon here and there, but really since June 9th, actually not even a week, since the start of the Cincinnati series, they lost 3 out of 4 to Cincinnati. They won 2 out of 3 to Detroit, and then they lost 4 in a row to the Red Sox this weekend. So they were actually at one point, they were 45-27, and now they're 48-35. So they've lost 8 out of 11. They're getting the shit kicked out of them tonight by Detroit. So they're obviously not going to be winning tonight. So they'll be on a 5-game losing streak, losers of 9 out of 12. In the last couple of days, they lost, I believe, 4 games on Tampa Bay. They went from 3.5 games up to a half a game back on Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay won every day while the Yankees lost every day. You look at a lot of these run totals and you're not overly impressed the last, during this stretch. Go back to June 18th against the White Sox and they lost 5-1. Then they won 5-0. Okay, so 5. And then since then, so since June 19th when they won 5-0, here's their totals. And I won't even give you wins and losses, just their run total. 2, 1, 3, 4, 4, 3, 1, 1, and 4. So against the Red Sox, they lost 6-3, 6-1, 4-1, 5-4, and tonight they're getting their asses kicked 7-0 so far. Yesterday was especially enraging because yesterday, not only are they getting no hit by Sonny Gray through 8 innings, they then managed to actually, in the 9th inning, tie the game. They're down 2-0 going into the 9th inning. They're about to get swept. Aroldis Chapman is on the mound, our old friend, and single, walk, fly out. They score a run on an error. Then Goldschmidt grounds into a fielder's choice. They tie the game at 2. They go to extra innings. They actually get 2 runs in the top of the 10th. So they're up 4-2. And then in the bottom of the 10th, first guy singles 4-3 because of the runner that starts at second. Double, sac fly, single. They lose 5-4, having only recorded 1 out. So 48-35 now. Like I said, they're getting their asses kicked tonight, 7-0. So they're basically out tonight. Do they even have any hits yet? They have 1 hit so far and 2 errors. Tonight it is Weathers who pitched an inning and 2/3. Well, here's what's enraging though. Weathers pitched an inning and 2/3, allowed 7 hits and 2 earned runs. And it's 7-0. So I believe most of these runs tonight, and obviously I haven't been watching tonight's game, I believe most of these runs tonight were probably unearned. So let's see, the run in the first would have been an earned run. In the second inning, you got single, strikeout, single. McKinstry scored on an error. Sac fly, single. All right, so most of those runs were unearned because the inning should have been over. And then in the fourth inning, which this wouldn't have been him, single, first, safe at first on an error by left fielder Bellinger, safe at second on an error, safe at third. Yeah, so just they've already committed 2 errors, leading to 5 unearned runs at this point. They're down 7-0. Look, you can look at the American League and, talk about how nobody's really very good and how the Yankees probably have as good a chance as anybody to, end up with the best record in the American League at the moment. Even after having played so horrendously, they are a game back of Tampa in the American League East, which is also good for the second best record in the American League overall. They're 4.5 games clear of the next closest team, which is the White Sox. There's only 2 teams in the American League that are more than 4 games over 5. Actually, there's only 4 teams in the entire American League that are over 500. And 2 of those are Cleveland, who's 4 games over 500, and the White Sox, who are 4 games over 500. So, the Yankees, to that observation, are in okay shape. But, when you see these stretches where they just don't hit and the starting pitching's getting their butt kicked, it's very hard to feel very excited about this team right now. Now, Aaron Judge has obviously been out for quite a while, although, I have not, like I said, it's been between the wedding and the Knicks. I've not done a ton. I watch the Yankees a lot, but I don't necessarily live and die with every game and read a lot of, stuff. And I'm assuming in the next couple of weeks, probably right after the All-Star break, I'll get more back into the flow of, being much more in tune with what's going on with them. But I'm going to try and see if I can get an update here. Let's see what they have for updates. Then you have a bunch of non-updates from Aaron Boone on Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. First, we've heard about Judge since he hit the injured list about 3 weeks ago, hasn't played since May. There's no timetable for anything. It's already been a month, and there were folks who actually thought he had a chance to return in 6 weeks. Aaron Judge is still taking things slow. He's coming up on 4 weeks, but it doesn't sound like he'll be ready for re-imaging at that point. Stanton is doing a little bit better and is a bit more ramped up. So if you can listen to that, and I was going to say August and think any earlier than August 1st. August 1st is in 5 weeks. It ain't going to be, not even 5 weeks. It ain't going to be August 1st. Your best case scenario on either of these guys is probably mid-August. So, they are not going to have these guys for 40 or 50 more games, best case scenario. So, there wasn't even a guess on who we could. Sounds more and more like this will be a September return for Judge. Call us pessimistic, but we're not sure how else to gauge the situation. As for Stanton, still nothing of substance. Suffered a setback 2 weeks ago. He's doing a little bit better. It's unclear when he'll begin a running progression. Stanton has now been absent for 2 months with a calf issue that the Yankees initially deemed day-to-day. Stanton has begun low-volume workouts, which doesn't really tell us anything. No timetable, sense of clarity. So there's that, and then you have Max Fried. The update on Max Fried was Boone thinks we'll face live hitters next week, but isn't sure. Fried, who was confident he'd make his next start after leaving his May 13th outing, is on track to probably miss 2.5 months. There's your deflating Yankees injury roundup right as the team squanders its momentum, blah, 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 blah. So obviously 3 big injuries for the Yankees that are going to be long-term injuries and not going to be resolved anytime soon. I haven't really checked in on Garrett Cole. I know he hasn't been great, but let's see if we can get up. I just want to see what Cole has done so far since returning to the lineup. Cole he's made 7 starts already, which I didn't really realize. He's 2-3 with a 4.06 ERA. So obviously not what you're looking for there. The real ace of the bullpen so far for the Yankees has been Cam Schlittler by quite a bit. He's 8-4, made 17 starts, a 1.62 ERA, which is obviously phenomenal. Fried was pitching very, very well before he was injured. It's the pitching, obviously, they've gone through a little bit of a rough spot, and the fielding has been bad. Hitting-wise, I don't think they have anybody who's hitting even close to 300. Yeah, well, the one who's hitting the closest to 300 is Goldschmidt at 289. After that, you have to jump all the way down to Ben Rice, who's hitting 272, Bellinger 262. Lots of guys in the lineup who Jazz Chisholm's still hitting 223, Dominguez 214. Lots of guys who are just not hitting. I want to see where the rankings are, where they rank in offense and everything right now amongst the teams in the league. Let me see if I can pull that up while we're here. So as a team, they are 22nd in batting average. They are 9th in on-base percentage. They are 2nd in slugging percentage. Okay. 3rd in OPS. Let's see how they are in RBI. So they're still actually pretty good in a lot of these offensive categories. They still lead the league in home runs, although just by a couple. That's crazy. So they lead the league in home runs, and they're 23rd in hits. So obviously a higher home run quotient than anybody in the league. Pitching wise, ERA, they have the best. See, this is what's so confusing. And maybe I'm just being overly critical of a 3-game stretch, but they have the best ERA in baseball. They're at 3.32. Milwaukee's 3.41. Atlanta 3.41. Best ERA in baseball, and leading the league in a lot of offensive categories. Second best record in the American League, but it feels like they stink. It feels like they're a very mediocre team. So again, plenty of time to sort of right the ship, but tough when they have so many guys out and they're losing every day to feel a tremendous sense of excitement. Right now, overall, they are, like we said, they're a game back at Tampa Bay. Nobody else is even close. Everybody else in the division is way under 500, although the Red Sox had a good stretch against the Yankees this weekend. Toronto 6 under in what has to be a big disappointment. Baltimore 7 under. Boston 10 under. White Sox and Cleveland basically tied for first. Percentage points of a percentage point away from each other in the AL Central. In the West, Texas, Seattle, Houston, and the A's all within 2 games of each other, although nobody is above 500. The Rangers are in first at the moment at 42 and 42. So really everybody in the American League is still God, how far back is even the team that's in last? The team with the worst record in the American League right now is Kansas City at 35 and 50, and they are 7 games out of the final wild card spot. Now they have to jump 12 teams, but a very mediocre year. Over right now, that last wild card spot is occupied by the Mariners, who are 42 and 43. The NL is obviously a little bit of a different story with so many teams that are very, very good. You got Atlanta, who's led the AL East or the NL East the whole year, 49 and 33, but the Phillies have come on really strong. The Phillies, I think I saw in June, have made up 6.5 games in the standings. The Phillies actually at the moment only 3 games back from the Braves, 4 in the loss column, as they continue to dig out of the hole they dug themselves early in the year, but they've done a pretty good job of it so far to be back to within just a handful of games, not even at the All-Star break yet. And even the Marlins and the Nationals, both over 500 in that division. The only team under 500 in that division is the Mets, who are way under 500. In the Central, Milwaukee with the really crooked record, 50 and 31. Cubs, respectable, 8 games over 500. St. Louis, surprising this year. They were supposed to be really, really bad. They are 43 and 38 and, 7 games back. Even the Pirates, 500, 42-42, and then Cincinnati, a few games under. And then in the NL East, probably not much of a surprise. The Dodgers with a huge lead already, 10 games, 54-30. The Padres, 43-39. So, the Dodgers where you would expect them to be. And again, it's too early to start looking at like wild card picture or anything like that. You got to really give that till, I would say, another month, give it till about August 1st. But, obviously as we get into July and we get closer to the deadline, we'll start to see teams on the move. The Mets are a big story here in New York. They did fire Carlos Mendoza, the manager, the other day. It was an interesting dichotomy because everybody in the media was killing the Mets, but they were all killing them for different reasons. Some people were killing the Mets for just generically being bad enough to need to fire their manager. There were some people killing them for why now, why not a month ago? And then there were people who were basically killing them for scapegoating the manager when really it's David Stearns' fault. And this brings me back to a point I wanted to mention during the Knicks topic, and I got kind of not sidetracked, but I just never got back to it. Mike Lupica, the longtime Daily News columnist, who, has always been a smug guy, and every column really is about how he's Mike Lupica, and that's swell. But he wrote an article a few days ago that I thought was interesting, and I probably won't be able to see all of it because a paywall thing will pop up. But the basic premise of the article is the Mets are David Stearns and he is to blame, basically saying like the Mets are built in the image of David Stearns and they're a terrible team. And he, this all lays at the feet of him because it's a team built in his image. He contrasts that, and that's how that we're in a, very different era in sports, or in New York sports. He compares it to, the article is written as a comparison to Leon Rose, where basically the idea is the Knicks are built in Leon Rose's image, and the Knicks are the world champions because Leon Rose is a great executive who went about building his team in the way he wanted to, and it made sense. And, this Knicks championship run was Leon Rose's vision fully realized and perfected. Meanwhile, the Mets are a disaster. They have squandered nearly all of the goodwill that they had from, the change in ownership a few years ago, to the point where the fans are almost every bit as furious as they were, pre-Cohen takeover when it was still the Wilpons. So that the Mets in the last 5 years, after that 2015, 2016 run ended, really it was just 2015. They lost in the World Series, and then the next year they got to the postseason and lost in the wild card. They were a below 500 team most of the next bunch of years. They did go 86 and 76 in 2019, but they were still a third place team, no postseason. 2022 with Showalter as the manager, and that was after they had gone from, it had been Mickey Callaway for a couple of years, then Luis Rojas for a couple of years, and then Showalter takes over. And in 2022, they go 101 and 61. So they have a great season. They end up in the wild card round. They lose in the wild card round to the Padres in 3. 2 years, the next year, they're disappointing year. They're 12 games under 500. And then 2 years ago, they get to the playoffs. They get to the end. This is with Mendoza as the manager. They get to the NLCS against the Dodgers. They lose in 6 games. Dodgers go on to beat the Yankees in the World Series. That offseason, they go out and get Juan Soto. and Met fans are ecstatic that they have a guy now who's, a front office and an ownership group that's there to spend money. And, they just were in the NLCS and they just got Juan Soto, added kicker that they stole him from the Yankees. And, here we go. We're ready to take on the Dodgers. Last year, they go 83-79, really fade down the stretch, no playoffs. And then this year, right from the start, has been a disaster. They're 35-49. They're 14 games under 500. I don't believe I'm going to see if I can find any interesting stats for this team this year. I believe Soto has played. How many games has Soto played? Soto has played in 65 games. So he's played in a lot of games. He is 17 home runs and 39 RBIs. The 17 home runs you can live with. 39 RBIs at this point in the season is obviously a big problem. The pitching has not been great to the best of my understanding. And, it's just interesting to see how sort of the any goodwill they had a year and a half ago has just totally melted away to the point where, the fans are every bit as irate as they've been in a very long time. And they finally were compelled to fire the manager. So, I don't have much that's that illuminating to say about the Mets, and I could be glib and say it's kind of funny. And it's not even that I'd like to see the Mets do bad. It's that when they are bad or when bad things happen, the sort of histrionics of Mets fans, particularly the Mets fans in the media, it's just so entertaining that it's hard not to kind of root for it to happen just because it's so entertaining. But of all the other teams in New York, the Mets are the one I have the least ill will towards. We went to Citi Field this weekend. I hadn't been to Citi Field in years. I'm trying to it opened in 2009. I don't think I had gone for the first time till maybe 12. And then I probably was at Citi Field maybe 10 times, probably not even that many, maybe 6 to 8 times in the 2012 to 2018, 2019 range. I'm almost positive I had not been there since COVID until I was there this year. I really like Citi Field. It's a really cool park to go to. I think they do a really nice job. It was kind of a crappy. We actually got bailed out because we wanted to go. We couldn't decide between Saturday and Sunday. Saturday was going to make a lot more sense for us to go. Just, hey, it's a Saturday. You don't have to worry about, got to get back, go to work the next day. Also, we thought we were going to have some stuff to do Sunday, which we did end up having to do. So even though the weather was kind of crappy Saturday, we said, you know what, let's go. They backed off on it's going to rain all day. I don't think the game's going to get canceled. We'll go. We end up running kind of late, and traffic in Connecticut's horrible because traffic in Connecticut's always horrible. And we're going to be there half an hour after the game's supposed to start. And we got bailed out. There was a rain delay. The game was supposed to start at 4:10. The game started at 5:20. All we knew was there was a delay. By the time we got in, parked, got into the stadium, got up to the upper deck, used the bathroom, whatever. I looked and it said, the game will start at 5:20. And at that point it was 5:03. And I was like, this was perfect. We're going to get because we also didn't want to get there and have it not start till 7:45 either. So it was the perfect amount of rain delay. And then the sun came out the last hour. So a couple of intermittent drizzles. The Mets actually won. They were down 2-0 and they had a big couple of innings and ended up winning 6-2. Just seeing here that the Grizzlies are trading John Morant to the Blazers, which is interesting, I guess. So it's I like the Mets. I like the franchise. I like the stadium. I like most things about the Mets. Now, when they get good, does it get a little annoying? Yeah. I did root for the Royals in the 2015 World Series, but that's a long time ago. When I go to a Met game, I like to root for the Mets. That wouldn't be the case if I went to a Jet game or a Net game. Some of that still, the leagues are a lot more segregated than they are in the other. The Nets are a Knicks division rival. But well, I use the term rival very loosely, but it's just like I said, it's hard not to be amused by the ongoing sort of circus that the Mets are. And it's an interesting hierarchy in New York now that everything's been reshuffled the last few years, and certainly the last few weeks and months, like not just in terms of like current goodness, but like sort of like the functionality of the franchise. I mean, the Knicks, who for years were at the bottom, if they're not number one right now in terms of like stability and, front office, like who's most got their shit together, I guess you would say. Like, I think the Knicks would probably have to be 1. The Yankees would be 2, because despite their foibles, they're still the Yankees. They're still in the playoffs every year. It was not that long ago they were in the World Series. I think at the bottom, it's hard not to put the Jets at the bottom. I think the Mets and the Giants are both pretty low at the moment. The Nets, it's just such an interesting shuffling of the hierarchy the last couple of years, and especially now where it's like you go like, why couldn't this team be more like the Knicks? And it's like, you never said that in the past. So, just kind of an interesting aside. But yeah, the Mets have been the first post Knicks major story in New York. Has been the Mets and their dysfunction. So we will obviously keep an eye on that as we head into the second half of the season as well. Although there's no other manager they can fire. So I guess with that, we'll circle for a landing here. Like I said, we'll be back next week. The first weekend of July will be right on the precipice of the All-Star break, All-Star game in Philadelphia this year, which they named that years ago because it's the 250th anniversary, or 250th anniversary of the country. So Philadelphia. Declaration of Independence. I think for a while they had talked about trying to get every All-Star game, but I think they just ended up with the baseball. But it's definitely a cool place to do it. Get it in the birthplace of the country on the 250th anniversary. So All-Star game in a couple of weeks. I haven't really seen who's been named to the team yet. I don't think they've officially done all of that yet. And then we'll be, like I said, we'll be on next week. We won't be on the week after because I will be at Myrtle Beach enjoying a nice vacation. And then we'll be back in late July. And again, probably 2 more off weeks there in late July and early August, sprinkled in at various times. And then we'll be back up and running as we start to get closer to football season again. Obviously, the Knicks and their offseason moves and what happens with Mitchell Robinson will be one that we certainly keep an eye on in the coming weeks. And whatever else happens, although you really shouldn't expect anything with Robinson at this point. He's as close to gone as you can realistically be unless something very unexpected happens. But we shall keep an eye on that and everything else that happens in sports. Obviously, if you're a soccer guy, the World Cup's going to continue for the next few weeks, and people will have plenty to keep an eye on with that. But for now, we will wrap things up. Hope everybody is able to enjoy what is hopefully a long weekend for them for the 4th of July. Hopefully everybody can get some time to enjoy. Where's the Tecmo end of the season music? Jesus, I'm having trouble getting my song up here. Hopefully everybody can get some time off.
Domino's best deal ever just got better.
And then
do some fun things, go to a barbecue, whatever. Enjoy. It's going to be crazy hot, at least in this part of the country, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but maybe we'll catch a little bit of a respite. With that, we will circle for a landing for the night. I want to thank everybody who listens. Nobody called in tonight, but so be it. Hopefully get some calls next week. Thank everybody who listens now, later on, whatever. Listen to the Hello Old Sports podcast. We've had some great episodes recently. We're going to have another bunch of good episodes coming up real soon. And with that, we will say goodnight. Stay safe, everybody. Take care. Happy 4th of July. New York Knicks are the world champions, and we will see you Monday, July the 6th at 7 p.m. Bye now.